This show contains some strong language, like f***. It's not going to get bleeped again, so that's, you know, that's if you get in trouble, that's on you. No, I mean, it's been so long since I did the show that I don't really remember how to, you know, do it. So, okay, so talk about, actually, you know what, let me write this down. Talk about interesting and unique video game ports. Even if they're shit. And I can swear? I can swear, great, brilliant, fuck yeah, okay. Alright, that's mostly indecipherable. Leave that with me. Yeah, and I'll make a PortsCenter. Okay. I love you too. Bye. I have no fucking clue what I'm doing. The Game Boy Advance hit the market in 2001 and very quickly became a dumping ground for ports of games from the 16-bit era. There's some good stuff like the Super Mario Advance series or Square Enix's fantastic port of Final Fantasy VI, and there's some also not so good stuff like Sonic the Hedgehog, which managed to mangle the in-game physics to such an extent that fans went about making their own ports or, and this is hilarious, attempting to recreate those broken physics in the original Genesis version. Then there's Mortal Kombat Advance, a port so heinous that, and this is true, when I took the pre-owned copy of the game I'd bought back to the store for a refund, they gave me my money back and told me to keep the game. Seems I wasn't the only person who bought and returned it within the space of a day, which is perhaps just a little bit telling. When we weren't getting disappointing ports of games we actually wanted to play on the Advance, we were getting faithful ports of games that probably didn't need to be re-released. Games like Mr. Nuts and Soccer Kid, games that were beloved by no one and anticipated by a grand total of 0 individual adults and children worldwide, a mathematical constant referred to by experts as Cameron's number, named for the sum total of people who are looking forward to the Avatar sequels. Trying to find decent ports on the Game Boy Advance is kind of like trying to find funny jokes on an episode of... Wait, what's that say?
It says...
No, I know what it says, I can't say that. I'm not saying that.
Just say the line.
Look, it's low-hanging fruit, okay? I have friends who work on that show, okay? It pays their bills.
I don't give a shit, okay? Just say the line.
Look, okay, all right, I know it's trendy to hate on family, you know, to hate on that particular show, and I mean, God knows I haven't watched it in years.
You watched it on Netflix last month.
There's got to be a better joke we can do, okay? We can do better than this.
Do you know how long I spent working on that line on this fucking script even? Like, I've been working on this thing for over a year and you want to shit on that joke?
It's a lazy joke.
It's true though.
I don't care if it's true, okay? It's not funny.
There. Changed it. Change the fucking line.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, all right, from the top. Okay. Trying to find decent ports on the Game Boy Advance is kind of like trying to find funny jokes in an episode of PortsCenter. Okay, all right, that's petty. You're just being petty. So, Doom on the Game Boy Advance then. At some point, someone at Activision or id Software or, I don't know, some other place decided that it'd be a brilliant idea to slap a game so violent that it directly led to the founding of the ESRB onto a handheld with a primary user base of Ickle Wickle Kiddy Widdies. Both Doom and Doom 2 got ported to the Advance, and the history of these ports is absolutely fascinating, at least, you know, it is to me with my baffling predilections. But in order to understand these ports, we first have to look at how they got there. The obvious thought might be that it's a port of the technically interesting but largely disappointing SNES port of the game, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking so, especially with all that bollocks I said at the start of the episode about the Advance being a dumping ground for ports of old SNES games, but no, the Advance port has almost nothing in common with the SNES version of the game, and that's interesting, because for all its flaws, the SNES version has one advantage over other Doom ports, and that's that the level geometry is much, much closer to the MS-DOS original.
Of course, the SNES port also has one fairly big disadvantage. It's shit. Monsters always face the player, which makes it impossible to gloop them in the back, as is my preference, and all of the monsters in the game are deaf, so they can't hear you sneaking up to gloop them in the backs they no longer have.
So which version of Doom has the most in common with the Game Boy Advance port? Well, in a shock twist straight out of an Agatha Christie novel, the answer is, in fact, most of them, but the reasons why might surprise you. Console ports of Doom hit the market in 1994, less than a year after the MS-DOS original. The Sega 32X version was the first to hit store shelves, but the first port to actually enter development was for the Atari Jaguar, a console so unpopular with consumers and developers that there were only 67 commercially released games for the thing.
The Atari Jaguar has a lot in common with the chronic illness fibromyalgia. Nobody really knows what it is, where it came from, or how it works, and people who have it are often ignored or belittled. The only difference is I don't have an Atari Jaguar.
Concessions had to be made in order to fit Doom onto the Jaguar. Textures were cut, level geometry was simplified with some levels being omitted entirely, and a small handful of enemies were cut from the game as well. This is important because the Jaguar port of the game is the base for most of the console ports, including the 32X port and the PS1 port, which is my personal favourite. These simplified levels were perfect for slapping onto consoles because they used less memory, so when the time came to port the game to the Game Boy Advance, guess which maps they used? And here it is, the first ever officially licensed handheld port of Doom. It was ported by David A. Palmer Productions, whose other work includes an Earthworm Jim game for the Game Boy Color that nobody liked, and an unreleased Saturn game called Virtua Hamster, which... What? Why? Why does this exist? I don't really. Why? I don't know why this is here. So the GBA port is based on the Jaguar version, and there's some interesting stuff going on under the hood here. For instance, the game features an option to switch between dynamic lighting, where areas have different lighting levels, and static lighting, where all the lighting effects are turned off. This does improve the frame rate, which wasn't great to begin with, though at a guess, this option was most likely added because the original Game Boy Advance lacked a backlight, making the game harder to play in low light environments, as illustrated by this hilarious comic I've casually stolen from Penny Arcade. There's also the issue of the music. For whatever reason, all of the music in the game is off by one level. The first level uses the music from the second from the third, and so on, all the way to the last level, which uses the music from the first one. Visually, it's rendering pixels at double width, which gives me some real Commodore 64 vibes, although obviously Doom does not in reality run quite so well on the Commodore 64. Oh, and one other thing about Doom on the Advance, it's censored obviously, with all of the in-game blood recoloured to green, earning the game a T for teen rating in the US instead of the traditional M for mature, because teens are of course emotionally capable of handling the moral and ethical ramifications of shooting monsters in the face with a double-barreled shotgun, so long as the resulting viscera isn't red.
The controls actually work rather well, considering there's only really 4 buttons to work with. You use the A button to fire, of course, and the B button lets you operate doors and switches, or you can hold it down and run. The L and R buttons obviously allow you to sidestep, or you can hold them both down and tap up and down on the D-pad to change your weapon. Now in the pilot, I actually did a different joke about sidestepping, or strafing, but I think we can all agree that I've matured a lot since those early days, and that kind of joke just isn't really my style anymore. Is that it? Do we want to put a joke here at all?
No, we're good.
We're good, apparently.
As ports go, Doom is pretty sturdy, a good effort despite its occasionally rocky frame rate and lack of 1:1 parity with the source material. Perhaps most importantly, it feels like Doom, and it must have sold well because Doom 2 was released the following year. The first thing you'll notice is that Doom 2 looks a lot crisper than its predecessor. It also has a slightly different feel in terms of movement and physics. Specifically, the lack of a fixed frame rate means it doesn't feel as authentically Doom as its predecessor. The music's improved, the graphics are okay, and the maps look more or less identical to their PC counterparts. So what happened? Why is this port so different? Well, it might be because this port was handled by a different company, Taurus Games,
which freed up David A. Palmer Productions to continue work on their magnum opus, Virtua Hamster. Look, I'm not going to let them live this Virtua Hamster thing down, and frankly, neither should you, okay? It's ridiculous. It's actively stupid that they thought this was a game worth making, and the fact that you remember neither the company nor the game itself just goes to show you what a hopelessly, hilariously misguided idea Virtua Hamster actually was.
But anyway, Taurus Games. Rather than attempt to port the Doom engine again, or base their work on a previous port of Doom 2, which would have been difficult because there weren't any, Taurus instead opted to use their own engine, dubbed Southpaw, which was also used for Duke Nukem Advance, which was pretty decent, and their own original FPS, Ice 9, which wasn't. The engine includes a number of optimization features designed to maintain a decent frame rate on the GBA, including MIP mapping, that's when lower quality versions of textures are used on objects that are further away. Graphics use a different, more washed out colour palette than the original, and actually appear to use fewer colours in places. The enemy AI will occasionally just switch off at times, presumably to save memory, and the functionality of certain weapons has been changed. Most notably the shotgun, one of Doom's most iconic weapons, is now significantly less accurate and thus much harder to score a kill with. Oh, and the armor system is entirely broken, with the game often ignoring your armor percentage entirely in many circumstances.
Which means your commando is actually going commando. No, that doesn't work. The Doom guy he's not commando, he's a marine. Same thing. It's not the same thing. And you know what? I'm starting to feel like this other Ben, this writer Ben thing that we're doing is just papering over the cracks in an inadequate script. It's just giving me an excuse not to polish the jokes I've already written that don't quite work. Maybe. Or maybe it's a metaphor for your inability to produce entertaining content after a year's hiatus and a year and a half of not really putting out much in the way of new content. Well, I mean, it might have been until you pointed it out. Now you've turned it into a self-aware piece of ironic metafiction. You've trapped us in yet another disappointing, subpar YouTube series where the host has to play a bunch of different roles in order to create this semblance of narrative and shoehorn that into a place where it doesn't fucking belong. You've trapped us in YouTube hell. This doesn't happen to Mikey.
Probably the biggest flaw in the GBA port of Doom 2 is that it doesn't feel like Doom, and that's in part I think due to the controls and the floatiness of the camera. It's hard to pin down exactly why it feels off, but just as people who love Sonic the Hedgehog know when that game's physics feel off, so too will a Doom aficionado know when the game that they love doesn't quite play the way they expect it to.
That's the most disappointing thing of all, because on paper, the decision to use a game engine specifically designed for the GBA rather than having yet another crack at porting the Doom engine sounds like a smart idea, but the consequence of that is that Doom 2 just feels wrong on the GBA, like a total conversion rather than a straight port. Not to mention the fact that, in the end, the optimizations don't actually help the frame rate that much.
Still, they've got to be commended on content. This port features every single level from the original MS-DOS version, including the 2 hidden Wolfenstein levels, with almost no content cuts, although 2 of the larger levels were split into 2 halves due to their size. That's actually commendable. The port of the first Doom used the Jaguar maps and so lacked levels that weren't given the low poly treatment, whereas this port is much more complete, and as a result is more representative of Doom 2 as a game, even if it's not a perfect recreation in terms of how it actually plays.
The Game Boy Advance, much like the Super Nintendo before it, wasn't really designed with true 3D in mind, which presents interesting challenges that both David A. Palmer Productions and Taurus Games approached from very different directions, resulting in 2 very, very different outcomes. These games have their pros and their cons, but I'd have to give the edge to Team Virtua Hamster for producing a port that, while lacking in content, does a better job of giving that Doom feel. Doom 2 is definitely Doom 2, but it's like your stepdad trying to win you over by taking you to the same place as your biological father used to take you. It's not quite the same, it's a little uncomfortable, and it might just be trying too hard. But hey, it's Doom, it fits in your hand, and it's good enough for what it's trying to do. Bit like this episode in the end.
Whew, it has been a while since I did one of these and it feels so good to be back in the saddle again. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do the usual YouTube gubbins, like it, subscribe to the channel, all that wonderful stuff. There's some great stuff coming down the pipeline, including more new PortsCenter. Yes, there's more coming, I promise you. I will definitely be at your baseball game. You can also follow me on Twitter, and I would encourage you to do so because I frequently post behind the scenes stuff over there. The next episode will be in a couple of weeks and will be about SimCity on the Super Nintendo. So until next time, thanks for your love and your support, and I will see you again.